We all think of the world as a place grounded in logic. There's no room for the supernatural or surreal. We tell ourselves those things only exist in stories, movies, and the media. I used to think like that too. But I was wrong. I was so damn wrong. It all started 2 months ago when I moved into a new apartment. It's located in a small building at the edge of town. Right next door was a giant old mansion that towered over every other building in the surrounding area. There was only a small alley between my apartment building and the mansion. When I looked out my living room window, all I saw were its towering walls. The mansion comprises a sprawling mess of different buildings all connected to a main one. In its prime, the place might have been fancy. Nowadays, after decades of neglect, it's not much more than a rundown ruin. Old musty curtains hang behind many of the stained dirty windows, but I'm sure no one lives there anymore. When I moved into my apartment, I thought it would be a typical dump. It was part of my town's social housing project, and the rent was quite low. Surprisingly so, it was a pretty nice place, at least for what it was. I can imagine most people wouldn't be too happy to live in a place like this, but I was rather content. At 34 years, I could look back at years of substance abuse and one shitty relationship after another. Now that I was clean, this fresh life of mine felt pretty good. I even found a job in the area. Sure, it was cleaning up in an old warehouse, but it was something. Apart from mine, only 2 other apartments in the entire building were occupied. There was a friendly but reclusive older couple who lived on the 2nd floor like me. Their apartment was down the hallway at the other end of the building. The ground floor was vacant apart from the apartment building. A group of younger people lived down there. They might be students, they might be unemployed. I'd hear them a few times during the night, but as long as it didn't cause me any trouble, I didn't care what they were up to. This entire mess first started one morning a few weeks after I'd moved in. I got up, and while I waited for my morning coffee, I took a glance out my living room window. There wasn't much to see apart from the mansion's wall, obviously. Yet something felt a little different this morning. I wasn't able to put my finger on it though, and soon shook my head. "You just need your morning coffee, Linda," I said to myself. A few days later though, I couldn't blame it on my lack of coffee anymore. There was a noticeable difference. It was much darker out than usual. At first I frowned, thinking my alarm went off too early, but it was 6 in the morning as always. Normally the sun shined down in the alley and at least a few rays of sunshine reached my living room window. Now it was all. I thought it had to be the weather, maybe clouds or a storm. When I opened the window and looked outward though, I could see the sun as clearly as always. It just didn't reach the small alley anymore. As I wondered about it and scanned the alley, it seemed almost as if it had shrunk in size. It was a ridiculous thought, and I was sure it was my imagination playing a trick on me. Somehow though, I could tell that the alley was different. I put my head out, looked left and right, then up and down. There was no doubt. The alley had been much wider before. Unnerved, I put on some clothes and went down the hallway to the old couple's apartment. Maybe they had noticed something or could tell me what the hell was going on here. I assumed they'd been living here for much longer than me. After a few quick knocks, the old lady opened the door.
"Oh, good morning, dear,"
she greeted me with half-open eyes.
"What brings you here so early in the morning?"
I was embarrassed, realizing that I must have woken her up. "Oh, sorry," I started. I tried to find a way to ask the question that had formed in my mind, but I couldn't very well ask her if she thought the alley outside had shrunk down. Instead, I opted for a safer option. "I was just wondering, did you or your husband notice anything strange last night? Outside in the alley, maybe?" She eyed me curiously for a moment before she shook her head.
"In the alley, you say? Oh, I'm afraid not. We keep that window closed at all times. Werner even put our wardrobe right in front of it. No reason to stare at those ghastly old walls, he always says."
I gave her a nervous, brief laugh before I agreed with her and apologized for the early disturbance. "Guess there's no helping it," I said to myself as I made my way down the stairs. I knocked once, then twice more before a tired-looking redhead with thick glasses opened the door. tired-looking redhead with thick glasses opened the door. "Morning," was all she mumbled in an annoyed, dull way. Then she stared at me, waiting for me to speak up. "Oh, sorry to bother you. I was wondering if you knew anything about Dimension next door. Why don't you go over there instead of annoying people this early in the morning?" Her tone of voice had changed noticeably. The first thing that came to my mind was, what a fucking bitch, but I bit my tongue not to say it out loud. "Well, I think something weird's going on and maybe you guys notice it too. It might sound weird, but..." Right at this moment she slammed the door in my face. "Bitch!" I cursed. I raised my hand and was about to pound against the door again, then I told myself to stop. "Calm down, Linda," I told myself. "You don't want to be known as the crazy chick again." So I went back upstairs to my apartment. Maybe it was all on my mind. God, the brain could be hazy. As I got ready for work, I did my best to ignore the window in the alley below. As I went on my way, I wondered if the sunlight had ever truly shone inside my living room. When I walked past the alley, though, I couldn't help but take another look. My doubts came back and I snapped a quick picture. Just to be sure it doesn't shrink again, I told myself, laughing a little. From that day onward, I kept the blinds to the alley closed at all times to keep my overactive imagination in check. Soon enough, I'd forgotten all about that weird morning. Must have been 2 weeks later when I was greeted by classes and another guy who I presumed lived with her. Hey there," she greeted me with an awkward smile on her face. Well, look who can be friendly if she wants to, I thought. "Hello," I said. "Some time ago you asked me about Dimension next door, right? What was that all about?" I was reluctant to tell her the truth, so I made up a... "I heard something at night, why?" Classes eyed me and it was clear that she didn't know what to say next. At that moment the guy next to her approached me. He was tall, skinny, and awkward. "Hey there, I'm Phil." He reached out his hand and after a nervous handshake he continued. "We noticed something strange and we were wondering if you did too." "Like what?" I pressed on. I could feel that he was as wary as classes about the entire thing. "Well, our friend heard noises out there, but he also said the alley got smaller?" I couldn't say anything. For a moment I expected them to laugh and to reveal that it was nothing but an elaborate joke. The laughter never came though. "What do you mean by that?" "You have to talk to Will about that," Classes spoke up. "He's the one who noticed it. I thought you might know something since you asked me about Dimension before. Also, I'm Chen, sorry about last time." A minute later I found myself in their apartment. 5 people were living there all together. Chen was the only girl, and I wasn't sure what to think about that. She introduced the 3 other guys in the room to me. There was Will, which she'd mentioned before, the other 2 were Steve and Jay. As we started talking, I learned that Will was the one who'd rented the place and moved in about a month earlier than me. The rest was crashing here for a prolonged period. Chen had her own room, as did Will. The rest of the guys slept in the living room. Needless to say, it wasn't the cleanest place. I was sure by now that these guys weren't students. "Well, at first I thought it was a stray, but the noise didn't stop, you know. The tapping against the window, Will started. So I checked out what the hell it was. Was the first time in the damn well forever that I opened the blinds. The first thing I see is a damn window and it's really fucking close." "What do you mean by close?" I asked, still playing it safe. "He's trying to say the freaking thing's closer than before, lady." The one named Chase spoke up. "Asshole," I thought as he sat there with a smug smile on his face. "Well, yeah, that," Will continued. "The damn window is closer than when I moved in. Shit, I can almost touch it if I lean forward. It wasn't like this before. Hell, I can't even remember if there was one to begin with." He thought about it for a bit, rubbing his puffy eyes. I made a mental note that this guy was definitely a pothead. "Oh yeah, there was a figure behind the curtains. It vanished right away when I started outside, but I'm sure about it. Shit was damn creepy, I tell you." I nodded. "To be honest, I noticed the same thing about the alley," I finally admitted. For a moment I looked around to see if they'd finally revealed that it was all a joke played on the crazy lady from upstairs. Instead, I saw Will's eyes grow wide. "You mean last night?" he blurted out. I shook my head before I looked at Chen. Remember when I knocked on your door?
Wait, back then?
She asked, surprised. Are you guys seriously talking about an LA shrinking? Jay asked, shaking his head. Maybe next time you're telling me the mansion is closing in on us? Fucking listen to yourselves. No one said a thing. The picture! I remembered and took out my phone. Only moments later, Chen, Will and I stood outside staring at the alley. You've got to be freaking kidding me, Chen said in a gloomy voice. All three of us looked at it and all three of us could see that the alley had shrunk by almost half its size. I instantly snapped a second picture. So? Phil asked when we returned. It's smaller, Chen answered. The fuck you mean? Jay cut in. The LA idiot, she snapped at him. You're seriously telling me that the fucking LA shrank down? Something like that isn't even possible. Go ahead and check for yourself if you don't believe us. It's definitely smaller than in my picture, I retorted, fed up by his act. Oh yeah, maybe you just suck at taking pictures, lady. I looked at him and started to get angry but kept it together. Seriously, I can believe Will coming up with something like that, but you guys too? Jay asked, staring at Phil and Chen. How do you know they aren't right? It was the first time the one named Steve said anything. Really, Steve, you too? Am I the only one who's fucking sane in here? Look at that, will you? Without asking, Chen took my phone and showed him the two pictures. Could be any freaking alley, Jay said, shaking his head. I noticed though that even he was a little unnerved by what he'd seen. So, what do you want to do about it? He started again. Call the man from social services? The police? What do you want to tell them? Hello, sir, if you... Will you shut the fuck up? I finally screamed at him. I could see the surprise on his face. Jesus, lady, no need for that, he said, raising his hands. Maybe there's an explanation. What if the mansion's falling apart? Phil tried to reason. Or maybe it's some stupid trick, you know, for YouTube or something, I tried. I mean, no one lives out here, right? They might try some social experiment or prank or God knows what. The others weren't convinced by my idea. Hell, even I wasn't. But it was better than the alternative of a mansion moving or an alley shrinking. There wasn't anything else we could talk about, and soon I returned to my apartment. I did my best to distract myself with a pleasant dinner and a movie on Netflix before I went to bed. A noise woke me up in the middle of the night. It sounded like something grinding against stone, accompanied by what sounded like breathing. I shrieked and jumped up for my night lamp, still half asleep. My first thought was that someone else was in the room with me. For a moment I looked around in a panic before I realized that it was coming from outside. I have to admit, I was a little apprehensive when I opened the blinds. What I was greeted with was absolutely nothing. The sound too had vanished. I opened the window and checked the alley as best as I could. I looked for animals, people, or even some sort of mechanism. There was nothing though. The alley was all but empty. I closed the window and the blinds and went back to bed. I'd barely drifted off when the strange sounds started again. When I looked outside once more, I could have sworn I saw something move behind the window next door. I shivered and closed the blinds. For the rest of the night I could barely catch any sleep. The thought of someone or something out there waiting for me behind that window was creepy. That window was creepy enough. What made it even worse was that whenever I drifted off, I could have sworn I heard the same strange noises again. In the end, I gave up, prepared myself some coffee and stayed awake until it was time for me to go to work. On my way, I took another glance at the alley. It looked as if the mansion was leaning over towards our small apartment building. It seemed almost as if it was reaching out for our small building. I averted my eyes and shook my head. Just your imagination, Linda. Something like that isn't even possible, I told myself again, but even I knew I was lying to myself. Work went terrible that day. I couldn't focus at all. I was sleep deprived and my thoughts centered on the weird events that had happened. Multiple times people yelled at me to get a move on and stop daydreaming. Eventually my superior came over and demanded to know what was going on. I told them I suffered from sleep deprivation and night terrors. Well, if the job's too hard on you, why don't you take a few days off and get some rest? He suggested in a sarcastic tone. I said nothing and nodded, knowing damn well it meant almost the same as getting fired. I was furious, mad, and cursed the damn mansion and whoever was behind this entire thing. When I got home, I was still pissed. I put on a random show on Netflix, but after only a few short episodes I drifted off to sleep. When I woke up again, it was already dark outside and my phone told me it was late at night. Great, so much for my daily routine, I thought. Soon enough, I realized why I'd woken up. They were back, the same strange grinding and breathing sounds. I've had it with this shit, I thought, ripped the blinds aside and opened the window. Knock it off, you son of a... I started, but what I saw was not a person. As the breathing and grinding continued, I saw something moving on the wall itself. It had to be some sort of mechanism that was moving the wall. With the dim light of my night lamp, I wasn't able to make it out though. I reached for my phone, opened the flashlight app and pointed it at the wall. The entire upper wall was covered in pulsating bumps. It seemed as if the bricks of the wall were moving in and out rhythmically. As the blaster was moving, it looked almost as if the wall was breathing. For a moment it reminded me of blisters or pimples on a person's skin. I stood there in horror and confusion, staring at the spectacle in front of me. One of the many bumps grew bigger and bigger before it burst open. The blaster crumbled from the wall and a thick yellowish liquid leaked from the wall. In an instant the air was heavy with a rancid, almost putrid smell. The worst, though, was the place where the bump had been before. Instead of bricks that should have been below the blaster, I saw a twitching, fleshy mess. There were holes or pores in it from which the disgusting liquid seemed to be pumped outwards. When the shock and the sheer absurdity of the situation settled in, I stumbled back, not even able to scream. In an instant, I rushed to the bathroom and vomited. For long seconds, I stood there behind the bathroom door shivering. I told myself to reach for the door and open it, but I wasn't able to move. What the hell had I just seen? I tried to reason with myself that it hadn't been real, that it couldn't be. It had to be my imagination, the grinding and breathing too. My mind must have made it all up for whatever fucked up reason. Yet the trick didn't work. Not this time. When I reached for the door, it wasn't to open it, it was to lock it. I don't know when sleep arrived, but I must have sat in the bathtub for hours shaking and shivering front door. For a few seconds I didn't understand where I was. When the knocking continued, I finally got up. For a moment I hesitated, then I unlocked the door and peeked outside. When I found nothing lying in wait for me, I hurried to the front door. At the door, Jen greeted me and I could see the relief on her face. "Oh, thank God, Linda, you're okay," she said. "I thought you'd be gone too." I had no idea what she was talking about. "What's going on?" "Will's gone," she exclaimed.